when you cut a leaf off of an aloe vera plant,
Mm-hmm.
I always say, if you've ever seen the ones in the grocery store, they're just expensive water at that point,
Mm.
because the minute you cut a leaf off, malic acid begins to eat away at all of the nutrients in the aloe vera.
Mm.
And within 6 to 8 hours, there's no nutrients left.
Wow.
And so we are literally cutting and in process to make sure that we're preserving the nutrients within 20 minutes.
Oh my gosh, that's great. Welcome back to the Integrative Women's Health Podcast. I'm here with Heather Florio from Desert Harvest. So let's talk about what inspired you to start Desert Harvest. Where did this all begin? And then I want to talk about what you guys are up to now.
Oh, yeah, definitely. So long story here, but I'll
Mm-hmm.
make it kind of short. Desert Harvest started in 1993. It was actually started by my mother. My aunt had, my mother's sister had interstitial cystitis. And you can imagine it's still not great today how bad it was in the 90s for diagnosis,
Yeah.
even to recognize that it was a disease. And so as a result, she was seeking relief from anything that she could try. She was very into natural products, and her and my mom would go to natural products conferences and pick up anything that they thought could have some level of pain relief and help with the symptoms. And they picked up some random bottle of aloe vera at a health natural products conference in Sedona, Arizona. And she took the whole bottle in one night.
Oh my gosh.
Probably not the safest thing to do considering the anthraquinones and aloe vera. We'll get to that later. But she took the whole bottle, but she slept through the night. And it was like, wait a second, there might be something here. And so my mother actually got with one of our chemist friends and figured out how we could concentrate this, how we could maximize nutrient content while making it safe for long-term use. And so developed the formulation of the super strength aloe vera that we still use today.
Wow, that's great. So, coming from a functional nutrition perspective, obviously, I'm a strong proponent of using aloe for many things around like bladder lining and even gut health, but there are some risks to it. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yes, definitely. So aloe vera, it's just a sort of, it has over 200 nutrients and it's 75 of them active nutrients. And so for us, if you open up an aloe leaf and you look inside, you've got the gel, and then below that, you've got a slimy, thin yellow layer down by the rind of the leaf. And that is what's called anthraquinones. And those are latex chemicals naturally in aloe vera. And long term, they've been proven in research to be carcinogenic to the colon, liver damage, kidney damage. And so they're not safe for long term use. The FDA allows 10 parts per million of anthraquinones in aloe vera at a safety level. Once the carcinogenic study came out, they still allow a certain amount. So if you see on aloe vera, a lot of the times you'll see words like digestive aid on capsules and juices and things like that. That is a good key indicator that has anthraquinones in it, because that is the only digestive really component of aloe vera. It has been, and it's meant to be used in short-term bursts, almost like if you're talking like Azos, you wouldn't want to take Azos forever, phenylphysdrine, and because it would damage the kidneys, same kind of thing. This is just meant to be a short-term burst to kind of help get the bowels moving and kind of help your digestive health.
Right. Like a temporary constipation support. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Something very temporary. And so that is what historically aloe vera has been used for internally. Actually, interestingly enough, many times what happens is in Asian countries, they actually take a little shot of it with everything in it once a day, but it's such a small, tiny amount, it keeps their digestive system regular, but then they also maintain the nutrients because aloe vera is also high in fiber. So a lot of the times when you're first starting this, and especially if you're nutritionally deficient, you might, even with the Desert Harvest aloe vera, part of our patented process removes all of the insoluble fiber, so we make it easy to digest. But there's trace amounts of the soluble fiber in there a little bit. And so many times people, when they first start the aloe vera, it's kind of flushing things out, and they're like, you sure this doesn't have the anthraquinones in it? The answer is no. We test every single batch for anthraquinone content to show that it doesn't have any. And we actually start with we use the whole leaf. So many times, a lot of the products that you'll see, they say things, the standard, digestive aid, you'll see things like you might see whole leaf. And that means they process the anthraquinones, everything. And then some might be claiming to be anthraquinone free. That say inner leaf gel. And so what that means is once you take and open up a leaf, and they slice the gel out just above the anthraquinones. So that technically gets them below the 10 parts per million of anthraquinones. That doesn't necessarily mean anthraquinone free.
Okay. Yeah. And that's, I think, a really important point to make. We haven't talked a lot on this podcast yet about the challenges with natural products in terms of quality, which is one of the reasons why I'm often recommending brands that have either been very well established, where I've actually met the people running the companies, such as you and your colleagues, or have some kind of voluntary FDA oversight. And in your case, you're starting to take it to the next level now, where you actually are looking to get FDA approval on a similar level, the same level really as Elmeron, which is the only other medication approved for interstitial cystitis. Can you talk about the process of that?
Nightmare? No.
Yes, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, Desert Harvest has always been highly committed to research. We did our first double-blind placebo-controlled clinical trial in 1995 with interstitial cystitis patients, and we had an 87.5% response rate of some or complete relief of all symptoms with that. We followed it up with research over the years. We did an NIH study for grant funding, for an NIH grant funding project. We actually did a questionnaire, so little room for bias there, definitely. And we did that with the Interstitial Cystitis Association. They sent it out to all their audience. We had 660 respondents and a 92% response rate in that subgroup. And then we just finished a study in Italy that is going to be published here within the next month or so. And we're really excited to introduce those results because similar, very great results. We actually took the worst of the worst IC patients. So one of the things that's different in Europe than the US is we really treat interstitial cystitis as a diagnosis of exclusion. And here we treat it, in Europe, they require a cystoscopy. There has to be true bladder wall impact of some sort, visual evidence, before you're diagnosed with interstitial cystitis. So in our Italian study, they actually took the worst of the IC patients that have responded to nothing. And almost every one of them responded in the study. And even the placebo group that got super strength aloe vera afterwards also responded afterwards. So we're really excited to introduce those results from that clinical trial. But what we're doing right now is at the same time that we applied to do the Italian study, mind you, this was like 2019.
Yeah, everything takes a long time in this process.
We are doing a same trial with Wake Forest University here in the United States. We were hoping originally to do a very large population of interstitial cystitis patients. But then the FDA decided that they wanted us to become a drug. And so as a result, we had to pare down the sizing of this study and increase the testing even further than we've ever done beyond. We normally do thyroid, liver function, CBC panels, things like that. But this, we're looking to go even further. So we're going to really study and really understand the mechanism of action. We've always theorized. So you mentioned Almiron. We know that it uses a chemical synthetic to kind of create a gag layer in the bladder.
Mhm.
Aloe vera is naturally made, naturally has high amounts of glycosaminoglycans in them. So as a result, we have always theorized that it is creating a coating of the bladder and having the mechanism of action of the anti-inflammatory, the analgesic action. It has antifungals, antibacterials. It even has D-mannose in it.
Mm.
Aloe does. And so so we've always theorized. And then, theoretically, when things are passing through the bladder, now they're not going to irritate because you've got this coating.
Yeah.
But we actually are going to go a step further this time with this study. And we're actually going to, after we kind of finish the first part, we're hoping to actually, at the regenerative medicine department at Wake Forest with Dr. Robert Evans, we're hoping to we're actually going to be able to watch in live time how the aloe vera interacts with the urothelial cell layer of the bladder, because they have a new thing where they can actually extract cells, bladder urothelial cells, and keep them alive and actually watch how the aloe vera interacts with those cells. So we're actually going to get definitive proof of how it's interacting with the lining of the bladder.
That's really interesting. And I think very encouraging, because one of the challenges that we all have clinically with managing painful bladder syndrome is that there are these various root cause drivers of the actual symptoms, the pain. So to back up for just a minute,
Mhm.
interstitial cystitis is a condition that, as you were mentioning, is classically diagnosed by cystoscopy, where an imaging is done inside of the bladder to see if there's actually any little like pockets, holes, irritation in that bladder lining, which in the US, sometimes that is done. It's somewhat great to hear they're doing that in Europe, except that it's a very painful
Pain.
procedure to have to go through, which is why a diagnosis of exclusion also makes sense, because essentially, if there are no other drivers they can find, like a chronic infection or things like that, then this kind of bladder pain, chronic nocturia. So when you said your aunt was able to sleep through the night for the first time in forever, that I'm sure was a big relief. Other kinds of incontinence, but it's really just that
Mhm.
like constant urge incontinence, urinary frequency, and then
Mhm.
a lot of pain in the region of the bladder, and pelvic floor dysfunction, pelvic floor
Mhm.
tension, because the bladder and the pelvic floor will sort of neurologically speak with each other. Also irritated by constipation and other things that can amplify the condition. So mechanistically, it's really great that we'll have this kind of data to be able to see what the aloe is truly doing. But I would say that having it like improve the lining of the bladder from a gag layer perspective, that mucosal layer is really a nice
Mhm.
thing to image, especially, or to even kind of imagine for a woman healing from a nervous system standpoint. But
Mhm.
also, if it's antifungal, if it's antibacterial, I think we're seeing more and more research coming out and just clinical pearls around women who have these conditions having essentially micro infections that are harder to see on some of our traditional infection, testing. Are you,
Mhm.
are you hearing about that?
There has been posited theories. It started with a doctor in the UK, actually,
Hmm.
and there have been posited theories of embedded infections.
Hmm.
Research thus far hasn't really proven that to be viable, although there are many people that go down this path. There's many people that have gone to the UK from the US to see. He actually passed during the pandemic, and so as a result, I'm not sure who's kind of taking over things there, but there is definitely a positive theory that hasn't fully been clinically proven. The hope is, and this kind of goes into the problem of the diagnosis of exclusion in the United States. You mentioned the cystoscopy. It's very painful. It is, and it usually leads to a flare that lasts for an extended period of time for an interstitial cystitis patient. So they wanted to get away from it more and more and more in the United States, and that's why they lean towards this diagnosis of exclusion. But unfortunately, what's happened as a result of that is we've kind of got a lot of misdiagnosis as a result.
Yeah.
And so really, you had mentioned painful bladder syndrome or bladder pain syndrome before earlier. So that is really a moniker that has really gone to describe. So interstitial cystitis is really describing people who have true bladder wall impact, Hunner's ulcers in their bladder, and painful or bladder syndrome or bladder pain syndrome that has really come to be known as kind of a complexity of might be other things. They've been trying to subtype forever. And unfortunately, there's been posited theories of subtyping, but clinically, again, nobody's been able to clinically prove that. However, there was Dr. Lenore Ackerman at UCLA, urology department. She actually created AI, machine learning, took all of her patients, put all of their data into this analysis based on these questionnaires. And interestingly enough, she was actually able to find statistical evidence of three distinct groups. True, like it was coming from the bladder, the pain, everything was coming from the bladder. There was, myofascial pain, so pelvic floor, and 88% of those resolved with pelvic floor physical therapy. And then this one isn't a distinct, but it's kind of like a neuralgia type category was the third category. And so really, and there was very little overlap in those categories. So right now,
interesting.
Yeah, they're trying to apply this on a broader basis now to see if, and so far as I've heard, the evidence is starting to hold up that this could potentially lead to subtyping out people that might just have pelvic floor dysfunction, that might feel that the urgency and the frequency and the pain is all coming from their bladder because they're getting the urgency. They're feeling like they have to go all the time, but it's not truly coming from their bladder. It's coming from their pelvic floor. Or neuralgia, other like chronic pain. You had a car accident, you had a back injury, and you're feeling it come down through your sciatica, and you're thinking that pain is, concentrated in your bladder because again, you're getting that kind of feeling of frequency and urgency and pain, but it's not coming necessarily from there. So it'll be really interesting to see how that all kind of plays out, because that's really what's needed to really help research come along as in regards to, are there other types of infections? Are there, the microscopic infections? Can they prove that? Things like that. So far, there's so little that's been able to be proven just as a result of a lot of misdiagnosis in that patient population.
Yeah. And I think what's challenging too is that, so it's interesting that they sort of found three distinct groups, but also, so again, from that sort of functional nutrition standpoint, we're looking at multiple systems at the same time, right? So in some cases, you've got a fairly clear Hunner's ulcer, bladder lining issue. But if that goes on for too long, then you could develop secondary pelvic floor or myofascial issues. You could develop, I wouldn't even call it infection, but like dysbiosis of the area, kind of mild chronic yeast overgrowth, mild chronic dysbiosis of either the bladder or the vulvovaginal canal, which could be related, again, kind of myofascially or local neurologically, and even the gut microbiome, because if digestion is not optimized, then you could have that pressure on the bladder. So I think probably the 20% of patients that come through our clinics and, my colleagues that work in this sort of intersection between pelvic floor and functional nutrition, functional medicine, is the people that are crossing across those three categories, because there's not sort of one straightforward strategy. But the good news is that I think aloe is a really valuable tool for any of them because of that pain relief strategy without irritating and making worse, actually potentially improving the gut microbiome and the digestive system function. So I can't see a time, and I mean, certainly I would love your thoughts, but I can't see a situation where adding aloe is going to be problematic.
No, not really, because we have made it safe for long-term use in high doses. Other than an initial, like, some people can have that digestive upset because, as you mentioned, many of these patients are very nutritionally deficient because they stop, like, there's been patients, I only eat white food. And
Yes,
it's like
yes.
they're so worried about eating that they become so nutritionally deficient. And so as a result, you're putting a high nutrition product from the onset in your body. And so a couple of things can happen. You can get stomach or digestive upset, and you can get kind of like a detox effect, like kind of just flushing things out, kind of feeling cruddy. Might mimic the symptoms of your condition, other things like that, kind of feeling like a flare. But once that happens within the first 1 or 2 weeks, we have had no reported side effects in over 30 years.
Oh, wow. That's really, really encouraging, because that is one of the challenges with nutrient supplements is even the detox reactions. We have to go really slow. People need to be prepared that could happen. Otherwise they get more fearful. And I think the point that you brought up about the nutritional protocols, I think one of the, I hate to say this, like, I'm glad anyone's doing any research, but the worst studies we had was that sort of like IC diet. It just has caused this deep and immense sensation of fear around eating that really restricts people from anything. I've had clients say to me like, oh, well, I put a blueberry in my mouth and then my bladder started hurting. Well, that's not a blueberry problem. That's a nervous system reactivity problem. Yeah. And it's not to say this is all in your head, but it is to say for sure that most of the time, adding beneficial nourishment and maybe very gently, slowly reducing 1 or 2 things. At the most, I've ever found 3 to 5 foods being problematic for someone. If you've restricted more than 5 foods from your food plan, that's a problem, and is actually probably making your situation worse because of that nutritional deficiency situation.
Oh yeah, major big time. I mean, we over the past 30 plus years, I mean, we have heard it all in regards to diet, and we very much recommend just like adding a supplement. There are other things that we have in our toolbox. If the aloe isn't just enough, we have quercetin, which is for a flavonoid that's great for that kind of histamine mast cell activation component of that's not all, but some IC patients have. We have a variety of different things, but we don't recommend trying all of that at once. Like start with one thing at a time. So same thing with diet. Start with one thing at a time. Test out foods for a week and see, we say a good week because that's really going to be the time to really listen and understand your body and not necessarily have more of a mental response that kind of goes, I don't know, more of a placebo response versus a true response to that as a trigger to that food.
Yeah. And I've even found that adding things first, or starting with the things that we know are very nourishing for the gut and the bladder, things like broths and cooked vegetables, because some people can't tolerate the raw. If they're dealing with SIBO or other dysbiosis, they have bloating or, constipation. So very gently, I think, work with people on this. I think the biggest thing not to do is like follow an Instagram list of what not to eat for painful bladder, because it's really a downward spiral to eating disorder, quite frankly.
Yeah, agreed. Same thing with supplements. Don't take the supplement list and buy everything on the list and start it all at once. Like
Yes, so true. So I want to briefly talk about mast cell activation syndrome. We're seeing that a lot in our clinic. Certainly, for our clients with endometriosis, that's very common. And people with endometriosis can also have IC and or painful bladder syndrome. But we're also seeing a significant uptick in our clients with mast cell activation because of long COVID. That's kind of one of the telltale signs of long COVID. So long COVID could trigger bladder pain that is really more of a immune dysregulation, a histamine activation. And so quercetin is one tool. Do you have any other tools? Is aloe helpful for that? What are your thoughts on histamine?
Quercetin is the best choice. When we're talking an over the counter, separate of the prescription. Hydroxyzine is the typical go to in a lot of cases from a pharmaceutical perspective. But from a natural perspective, yes, the quercetin. And actually, interestingly enough, during COVID, we couldn't keep quercetin in stock because they were actually using it to treat patients. And so people just started taking it prophylactically. And it was a really interesting experience. But yeah, I mean, and not everybody seems to necessarily have, when they do have this component, the kind of the telltale for interstitial cystitis, separate of the long COVID, is that a lot of them see increases in their symptoms during high allergen time, spring, fall, summer, just depending when their normal allergy triggers might happen. A lot of the times they're seeing flares or triggers, or, interstitial cystitis is a really interesting thing because you can have, even with the aloe vera capsules on board, you can have breakthrough flares due to histamine activation. Stress is a big one. And then, of course, diet, eating the wrong food, too much of it per se. Could be, like going and drinking a bottle of wine. And then
for sure. Like the high histamine foods, alcohol, fermented cheeses, things like that, lunch meats, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, interesting, we go again to posited theories because we haven't clinically been able to prove this, but many posited theories are that interstitial cystitis itself might be an autoimmune disorder.
Yeah.
Because it has so many similar comorbidities to other autoimmune conditions. And so as a result, and interestingly enough, they've done research where they tested out a neobladder, bladder removal, and one, they still had pain, the start of pain, and then two, in the neobladder, it began attacking that. And so you were seeing the same response. So it's like, oh, great, we could just replace our bladder and do this. And it's like, no, actually, you can't just replace your bladder and get a new one. Because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to start attacking, which really leads towards that autoimmune theory. But again, like, it has not been clinically proven, but it is a positive theory.
Yeah. So I think for the clinicians listening who are working with these complex bladder cases, you have to really do kind of a whole system assessment. It could have a dysbiosis component. It could have an immune hyperactivity component or mast cell activation syndrome or other histamine component. There is very commonly a myofascial or pelvic floor myofascial component. There's that neurologic crosstalk and central sensitization of, the nervous system kind of top down triggers. And then there are the digestive dysregulations that exacerbate the bladder dysregulation, in addition to some of the behavioral things around, constantly using the restroom just to try to prevent the symptoms from popping up later, or, that sort of putting the time to urinate closer and closer together becomes behavioral exacerbating as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So, and there are tools. So we have these pharmaceutical tools like hydroxyzine and ketotifen and cromolyn sodium, but I think sometimes it's so much more valuable to start with, like, quercetin is a natural mast cell stabilizer. It nourishes the vasculature system as well and the lining of the vessels, which is really good for the local vascularization of the pelvis and the bladder, in addition to the bladder lining and kind of quenching those histamine, the mast cells, stabilizing the mast cells. So if we could get away with less suppression, because the drugs are, look, they can be very valuable in certain situations, but sometimes we have to be on them forever for longer. The system doesn't kind of settle down if it's so used to either an antihistamine or a mast cell stabilizer medication. Your clients may need to be on that longer. So I like the idea of starting with some of these tools that are readily available, have very little side effects, and can be, played with in terms of people needing to be on them forever. Sometimes they're able to come off them when all of those other drivers start to be unwound.
Oh, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, when you look at side effects, when you talk hydroxyzine, well, I think it's over, don't quote me on this, I think it's like 50, 55 that dementia components can start to
Yeah.
become a concern on continuing on that. Elmeron, which we mentioned earlier, is currently undergoing class action litigation for causing retinal myopathy and making people go blind, as well as liver damage, hair loss, kidney damage. So, that's why it's been very important for us from the very beginning to be able to research our products, to understand how they function. Not a single one of our products come out without some type of research behind it, looking at safety profiles. Quercetin, quercetin. But even when you talk natural, sometimes you have to be careful. Aloe
Oh, for
vera,
sure.
you think you can go to the health food store and just get the random bottle of aloe vera off the shelf, and
No.
oh my gosh, it costs $10 versus Desert Harvest is $68, regular price roughly per month. So we have programs where they can. But if you compared milligrams to milligrams alone, in a lot of those cases, separate of the safety profile and what is in those or how those are processed, because they're not the same thing. They can't be the same thing. We have a unique patented process. But, knowing that, even if you just compared milligrams to milligrams, you would see, interestingly enough, there's another brand that's pretty readily available. And someone recently, we have like a chart on our website that's like $360 to equal the same amount of milligrams as our
Wow.
one bottle of 60 for $68. I mean, just to give you an example, here's the bottle right here. So this one bottle of super strength aloe vera takes roughly, this is how concentrated it is. It takes roughly 89 full grown aloe barbadendis miller leaves to make one bottle.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So we go through a lot of aloe vera.
Where do you grow it?
So we grow it down in Mexico.
Okay.
It has ideal conditions for growing, as well as very important to us is our fields are actually at the base of a volcano. They're certified organic, and it's very important to us that we have that high nutrient content from the volcanic soil. The other thing is when you cut a leaf off of an aloe vera plant, I always say, if you've ever seen the ones in the grocery store, they're just expensive water at that point, because the minute you cut a leaf off, malic acid begins to eat away at all of the nutrients in the aloe vera. And within 6 to 8 hours, there's no nutrients left.
Wow.
And so we are literally cutting and in process to make sure that we're preserving the nutrients within 20 minutes.
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Yeah.
So you haven't had any side effects other than those initial digestive side effects in the 30 years you've been in business. Do people tend to take this long term without challenges? Because sometimes,
Yes.
if something's working, we might need to stick with it. Is that safe?
Yeah, so we've had people taking it for 30 plus years,
Okay.
from the very beginning since 1993.
Mm.
The one thing that we recommend before starting this is, going back to that histamine component. If you're highly allergic to a lot of stuff, it's safe to just, we have like samples that
Mm.
customers get. It's a 1 day supply. They can take it like right in the crook of their arm, with like, take the powder out of the capsule with a little water, hold it there for 20 minutes, and see if they develop any general allergic symptoms, which is what we recommend, because by the time you ingest it, it's a little bit more of a reaction if you're
Reaction.
allergic.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
And
Mhm.
that's pretty much it. You can be allergic to aloe vera.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's important to test that for sure.
Yeah.
So I would love to switch gears briefly and just talk
Sure.
about your path as a women's health product business owner and developer and grower. So you began to work with your mom and are now the CEO of the company. How has your business journey been for any of our practitioners who are thinking about moving into the area of product development?
Don't give up. It's not easy. I started. I've been working or involved with Desert Harvest in some way since its inception. When it started in 1993, I was in high school,
Mm.
and so I started. I helping in a variety of different ways. By 2012, my parents were aging, and they're like, we can't keep doing this. Either you take this over, or we're gonna have to figure something else out. And I said, okay. Was like, fine. And so I came on full time at that point, started taking over operations. And it became clear to me, my mother had started getting really involved with pelvic floor physical therapy from
Mhm.
the onset of when it was becoming a burgeoning new growing field.
Yeah.
And so I can remember being with her at IPPS in Vegas,
Mm.
and it was like the first or second time it had ever happened, and there was like 75 people, and that included the vendors.
Right. Yes.
And
I might have been there in the early 2000s. Yeah.
yeah. And then now, you go to, we were just talking about being at the American Physical Therapy Association meeting, and not all pelvic PTs, of course, but I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking 13,000 people there,
Yeah.
and a completely different experience. And I mean, you talk about Pelvicon. I mean, they sell out instantaneously.
Hmm.
And so we just, we need so many more pelvic PTs. It's so needed. We recommend that to every single IC patient that calls us, and because we know that when they're going, they're going to have that. They're Because they're in so much pain, their pelvic floor is probably hypertonic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like,
Definitely
and
guarding at minimum. Yeah.
yes, yes. And so we highly recommend that as part of their journey, no matter what. But yeah, I mean, over the years, it started to become very important to me to craft products that were missing in the market, or that were not either safe or sustainable enough, in my opinion, for a woman. For instance, Aloe Glide. That was really important to me. We had always had the personal lubricant, but it became even more important to me to start educating women around the world about lubricants, about what should go into your biome, what should not go into your biome, because there are really, literally, separate of us, there's one other lubricant in the entire world that should probably go into a biome, because osmolality is so important. We know the
Hmm.
World Health Organization did their study in 2015, with third world country sex workers, and
Mm.
they studied lubricants to look at it from a safety profile. What was causing the biomes to break down? How could they be safer? And they tested all of these different ones for osmolality, and they set the first standard for osmolality, that it should be 290 plus or minus 80 points,
Hmm.
and no more than that. So that leaves you, and lubricants are required to be FDA approved medical devices now. There are many bad actors out there, unfortunately, that are still not. I think the FDA, they were a little busy with COVID, but
Right. Right. Yes.
so they have some catching up to do. But I think it was really, important for me that we began kind of letting people know about how their biome should be. It's not just about pH. We need to also focus on osmolality. And then we also need to understand that anally, your biome's completely different. And
Of
that
course.
if
Yeah.
you put an acidic anal lubricant in your in your anus, your epithelial cell layer is literally going to fall out almost instantaneously, because that is actually more subject to pH than osmolality. And it is almost an instantaneous, whereas the vagina, is the wall, the vaginal wall is going to be more of a slowly dry out over time and then kind of fall out.
Well, and it's designed to be more acidic there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So.
And it's really important that that the lubricant's osmolality is set right, so that the fluid can flow in and out of the cells. And so, like, Desert Harvest Aloe Glide is an FDA cleared medical device as a sexual lubricant and as a vaginal moisturizer. And we're currently undergoing fertility testing. So that's our newest
Great.
piece.
Exciting. So it really seems like, from a business standpoint, you took, what your mom built was inspired by the need to help her sister. And then you and she, over the years, have really thought differently and started thinking about this as a company that could support women's sexual health in a way that's really, and just physical health in general, in a way that respects the normal, natural, ideal way that the system should be running, with a healthy microbiome, with healthy pH, with healthy osmolality, with removing the portion of the aloe leaf that has been connected to liver challenges and other problematic side effects. So I think that commitment makes it harder to run a business, I would imagine, because it's more expensive. But there's got to be a sense of kind of challenge and excitement around it too.
It is rewarding. It's gratifying because, what I do here really allows me to do what I love, which is to support work that others are doing and work that I can do myself to go educate women around the world. Women know so little. It doesn't matter where I'm at, what I'm doing. Like, the minute someone hears oh, you work in women's health, pelvic and sexual health, they're all like, can I ask you? I mean, I get the most intimate, personal questions ever in the grocery store, wherever, and on an airplane. And so it's spreading that knowledge that is so needed. For instance, in August, I'm really excited about this project. We were supposed to do it last year and we had to push it off to this year because of safety concerns. But we're actually going to Peru. And we're bringing indigenous women out of the mountains of Cusco. And so over 3 days, because everything is word of mouth, and they said expect hundreds each day. They will come out, and we're teaching an entire pelvic and sexual health course to these women. And I'm so excited. That's my passion right there, is to be able to change things for women, because the stories that we have to hear, the experiences, no one should be dismissed. No one should be told it's all in their head. Nobody should have to feel that way. And we have so much catching up to do in women's healthcare. And I actually created a new company, which,
of course, those of us who are entrepreneurs get that. We get that. I've always got 5 or 6 other things on the side. Yeah,
exactly. And so I worked to develop. We developed an a continuously learning autonomous AI model to research patterns in women's health and research data, while also giving access to women around the world to healthcare, to the top women's healthcare practitioners in the world. We've already got signups, and once we get live and launched, and we'll go even further. So our idea is, when you do a study, I mean, how are we going to catch up women's healthcare when we're already over 100 years behind?
Right.
And we're studying segments, little
Yeah.
segments here, little segments there. But yet, for instance, even for us in this industry, we make all of our products based on a white woman's lactobacillus dominant vagina.
True.
We do not think about different biomes and different ethnicities. We don't think that Black women have a completely different biome makeup than like I do or you do. And so it's very important to me that we gather data from all over the world. So this isn't just going to be exclusive to the United States. So that's coming soon. And same thing with like new products. It's always, and I say to anybody who's probably listening, it's constant innovation. It's my brain doesn't stop, as you probably understand. And
I totally get it. Yeah.
It's like we've got to do something. And so, like, for instance, we actually have a new product that will come out this summer. We've been in testing. So right now, the standard over the counter for recurrent UTIs is D-mannose is the standard kind of over the counter. Well, in research, D-mannose only binds to E. coli bacteria.
Right.
And so we discovered a new ingredient and studied the safety profile. And right now we know for sure it binds to 3, and we're studying 2 others it potentially binds to. And so we've been doing a little bit of a pilot deliverability study with Live UTI Free, the UK organization, and their audience. And then we're hoping to be able to release that product this summer. So
that's very exciting.
Yeah.
I love all of this. And, when you're looking at different ethnic populations, it might be also really valuable to look at different like food sources, you know what I mean? Like the microbiome may not vary by ethnicity as much as local diet. So that's something to consider. And like local stressors, because that can impact the microbiome. And when you're in Peru, please gather information about maca and the other adaptogens that they use there, because that could really help for
menopause,
perimenopause. Perimenopause, menopause. We use some of that, but I think there's how we use it now in functional nutrition is very, it's kind of refined, exactly what you were talking about. Like it's stripped of potentially some of the depth of value that we could get from really learning from the people who are using it on the ground.
Exactly. And using it in their natural states. That's the other thing, going back to where you mentioned the FDA and safety and stuff like that. They can only do so much. They're so overwhelmed. And right now, every, supplement or skincare company in the world is subject to some level of FDA standards. But those FDA standards are like, here, I did the required basic testing and I'm compliant. And so for so many things, you don't even know what's in the product, or whether it's like interestingly enough, I use this as a example, but in recent research, they came out with the cold medicine.
Right.
And they came out and they said it does absolutely nothing.
Right.
It's just, a perception. It's not doing any harm. And they said, and the FDA said, well, we're a safety organization. We're not an efficacy organization.
Yes.
So they can continue to sell to the American public. And I can tell you right now, I'm not a name namer, but there is a juice that is readily available in the United States, an aloe vera juice. And this is many aloe vera juices on the market. There's only 2 ways to preserve juice. And this is why we don't recommend them ever for bladder patients. And this is why we do not make a juice, because the only way to preserve them is bladder irritating preservatives or heat treat it.
Right.
So once you heat treat it, you've got really expensive water, because aloe vera is 98.5% water. And
Right.
so we ran tests on juices, other products, things like that. And there are a ton on the market that are just really expensive water,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so that goes into the idea that just it because and what are you going to do as a consumer? Spend the money
Right.
for the expensive testing, or do you just have to trust the brand, that you talked about brand trust and brand identity, or that maybe they're putting up the research, the information, the third party testing, things like that, to kind of prove that their products are what they say they are. And in most cases, the supplement industry, even the skincare industry, doesn't do that,
Yeah.
because it's profits over people.
Yeah. And I really believe that those of us kind of professionally working in functional medicine, functional nutrition, pelvic physical therapy, where we're recommending these products to our clients, we do have a responsibility to get to know the actual companies because there are many good companies that have been in business for 30 years, 50 years. This makes a big difference because you've had the time, the resources. It takes a lot of resources to do that additional third party testing. It takes a lot of research, as you're saying, to, you know, extract the ingredients within 20 minutes. That's a huge
Mhm.
process, literally on a industrial ish farm in Mexico. You've got to have an operations effectiveness, which is not
Yeah.
easy to do. And I really think that when we think about any of these products that we're utilizing to help our clients, we have to really understand them. So I really appreciate you coming here and sharing your research and your experience and the experiences of your clients, because having that 30 years of data with specific products helps us to put that into an entirety of a plan of care, if that makes sense.
Yes, and that's why we do this. It's been a struggle, years of struggle for legitimacy.
Hmm.
That we're not just some hack, some natural products. In this day and age, it's a little bit easier. But in the '90s,
No, no.
it was like fighting tooth and nail. We realized
Yeah,
very early on we were going to have to spend the money to invest in the research to show and to let people know up front. So what is become kind of novel now, and everybody just kind of jumps in on the bandwagon. This was something that was very rare in the '90s for a supplement.
it's very true. Yeah. And it was even very rare to consider that nutrients could help with pelvic pain, with bladder pain. I mean, even when I started lecturing on this in roughly 2006, 2008, 2010, which was, gosh, 20 years really after you started. Well, 10 years anyway. And it was difficult to get people to listen to that perspective because it was it just didn't seem like, it was medicalized enough. There was a lot of reasons why people were resistant. It was like, how could something so simple, natural be as effective as a drug? And
Hmm.
it really is. And in many cases, it's better because we don't have the secondary consequences of some of the medications for sure.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, this is we even have a CBD product,
Mm.
which, it took us years. We actually studied all, full spectrum, broad spectrum, isolate. We studied topicals. We studied everything. And we worked with the University of Colorado. And we actually found that the topicals, cannabis is inert. It
Mm.
has to have a carrier to make it systemic.
Mm.
So it almost becomes a marketing ploy because they add things. If you look at the label, actually, they have like camphor, menthol, arnica,
So they add things that you can feel. Yeah.
things that actually impact the muscles. Whereas cannabis is a great moisturizer.
Sure.
It's
Sure.
great.
Yeah.
And so we actually found that CBD isolate was the responder in our test groups. And so as a result, we went to the University of Colorado and we actually did a bioavailability study where we were able to show it's 25% more bioavailable than any other CBD product out on the market. And then we followed that up because there's almost 8,000 CBD brands in the United States, and it's the wild, wild west, and it's being completely unregulated because of legislation that still needs to be tightened up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we went to McGill University in Montreal, and actually studied what mechanisms of pain it actually functioned for, because they say it works for everything.
Right.
And so in the research that we did, we had to do it in mouse models, but we were able to validate it with human donors, because we can actually keep the neural pathways alive for up to a month. And so we were able to validate it that way, because at the time we couldn't do any cannabis related research with humans. And so it was kind of our way around it. And so, we studied arthritis, we studied bladder pain, we studied nerve injury pain, chemotherapy pain, surgical pain, MS pain. And what we found a variety of different pain models that it didn't really seem to respond for joint pain or muscular pain. It really was only neuropathic pain. And so like the chronic nerve injury pain, 56% reduction in pain after 24 hours.
That's great.
78% with the bladder, and similar results for the chemotherapy and surgical pain.
That's really valuable, because that's actually the more difficult pain to unwind from a clinical standpoint, for sure.
Yeah. And so being able to relax those is really important. And I know that even in the industry right now, there within the pelvic industry, there are a lot of people also utilizing CBD lubricants. Those aren't FDA cleared. Just like that's the one thing we haven't even touched it, because legally you have to have a 510K medical device, and the FDA will not approve anything with CBD or cannabis in it whatsoever. And so those are one of those like gray areas where there's all these products coming out, but we don't have necessarily, again, probably a great moisturizer.
Sure, but no real data on efficacy and potentially safety when we can't study it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, what is it doing to the biome? What is it doing to the vaginal biome if you insert a CBD suppository? Like, what is it actually doing?
Right. Really, really valuable. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Heather. Where can all of the women's and pelvic health practitioners listening to this find more about your company and your products and the work you're doing?
Oh, yeah, definitely. They can definitely visit us on desertharvest.com. Or if you have specific questions, want samples as a practitioner, you can go online and we have a form that you can fill out. You can call us at 800-222-3901, or you can message us on social, Instagram or Facebook, either one, Desert Harvest Aloe Vera. Thank you so much, Jessica. This is wonderful.
Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciated an even deeper insight into this supplement world, because it's so important that we learn about it. It can be complicated for a reason. And so as clinicians, we really have to be ahead of all of that. So thank you for sharing all of your wisdom.
Yeah, glad. I hope it helps. Nuggets.
Yes, yes. All right. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll see you next time.